So I'm staring at my own land, watching oil spill out of a pipe I never approved, on a ranch that's been in my family for 3 generations. The HOA didn't just trespass. They drilled, illegally. And when I confronted them, they acted like I was the problem. That's when I started pouring cement, one hole at a time. What they didn't know was I had already tipped off the state's environmental enforcement, and now the board's neck-deep in a federal investigation. But before I tell you how that all went down, you need to understand what kind of corrupt circus this HOA really was. It started like any other morning on my family's ranch. Quiet, calm, and soaked in golden sun filtering through the oaks that line the back acreage. The scent of mesquite and dry earth lingered in the air. I was halfway through my coffee when a strange rhythmic pounding interrupted the peaceful symphony of chirping birds and distant cattle. At first, I thought, maybe one of the neighbors' old trucks had broken down again on the dirt road. But when the sound didn't stop and was joined by the low whirring of machinery, I knew something wasn't right. I climbed into my UTV and headed toward the southeast corner of my land, near the fence that separates the pasture from the overgrown field the HOA always wanted to beautify. But as I approached, I saw 2 white, unmarked trucks pulled off the side of the fire lane, their beds loaded with black PVC pipes, coiled hoses, and boxes labeled Cortec Drilling. I didn't recognize the workers. 3 men in hard hats and dusty boots operating what looked like a small-scale drilling rig right in the middle of my family's soil. No signage, no permits posted, no request for permission. I killed the engine and walked up, waving a hand to get someone's attention. One of the workers glanced at me briefly, then went right back to guiding the drill. Another guy, chewing a toothpick like it was a cigar, stepped forward. "Morning," he said. "You, the guy with the shed over the hill?" "No," I replied firmly. "I'm the owner of this property, and I didn't authorize any of this." He blinked, shrugged, and motioned toward the wellhead. "We've got orders from the HOA. Said this was part of their community grounds restoration." "Restoration?" I asked, already feeling the heat rise in my chest. "That's a drill rig. You're not restoring, you're extracting. Who signed off on this?" Before I could get another word in, a familiar voice chimed in behind me. "Karen, HOA board." Vice President Karen Withers, blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, clipboard in hand, came strutting down the trail in wedge sandals, completely unfit for dirt paths. She gave me that fake smile she'd perfected from years of passive-aggressive neighborhood policing. "Oh, hi," she chirped. "I see you met the contractors. We're just doing a little maintenance. Some soil stabilization for runoff control." "Cut the nonsense," I said, gesturing to the rig. "You're drilling for oil. I can smell it from here." She feigned surprise. "Well, I mean, there may have been some incidental resource discovery during the survey, but the board voted and deemed it an asset for the community. You're part of the HOA now, after all. That's when I nearly lost it. I was not part of the HOA. My land had been grandfathered in long before their suburban development sprang up around us. I'd made it clear during multiple mail exchanges and even refused to sign their so-called voluntary inclusion paperwork. And yet, here they were, on my property, acting like they had dominion over it. I pulled out my phone and opened the digital copy of my deed. "You see this?" I said. "This land has been in my family for 3 generations. It's zoned as agricultural residential, and nowhere in this document does it say I fall under your HOA jurisdiction." Karen's smile thinned. "Well, if you'd kept up with the newsletters, you'd know the zoning board approved an expansion of community oversight. You're within 300 feet of a regulated greenbelt now." "That greenbelt is a barbed wire fence and a patch of dead thistle," I snapped. "You trespassed. You drilled. You took my oil without so much as a phone call. That's theft." One of the drill operators turned off the machine, finally catching on that things weren't going smoothly. Karen folded her arms and stepped closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. "You should be careful with those accusations," she said. "The HOA has legal representation. If you interfere with this project, you'll be in violation of several community ordinances, including obstruction of development." I laughed out loud, because in that moment it hit me how deep this arrogance ran. She really believed she could walk onto someone's private land, drill for a federally protected natural resource, and bully the rightful owner into silence with empty threats. I backed away slowly, not saying another word. I'd seen enough. Karen didn't know it, but by the time the sun set that day, I'd be on the phone with environmental attorneys, state regulators, and a local reporter I went to high school with. The war wasn't coming. It had already started. And I was going to make sure this board felt every consequence of what they just unleashed. Back at the house, I parked myself in front of the dining room table with a laptop, legal pad, and a growing list of HOA board members' names. I knew there had to be something rotten beneath the surface. No one just casually drills for oil on someone else's land without a paper trail. Karen's smugness told me one thing. She wasn't operating alone. And I was about to find out just how deep this conspiracy ran. I started by downloading every HOA bylaw, newsletter, and public record I could get my hands on. Most of it was standard boilerplate, lawn maintenance rules, mailbox color standards, and vague language about community development. But then I found something odd, a file named Amended Articles of Jurisdiction, Quarter 2. It hadn't been included in the public newsletters or even listed in the official agenda minutes. And the kicker? It was time-stamped just 3 weeks ago, right around the time I started seeing strange trucks on the outskirts of my property. Buried in the legal jargon was a newly inserted clause, one that stated the HOA had authority to explore and utilize undeveloped land within the boundary of Phase 4 for the purposes of natural resource preservation and community enrichment. Phase WARF, according to their own maps, had just been extended by a so-called unanimous board vote. I cross-referenced that vote with the official meeting records. There was no vote, no sign-in sheet, no recorded discussion, nothing, just a blank line where public comment should have gone. That's when I started making calls. I reached out to a few neighbors I trusted, people who, like me, had been on the receiving end of Karen's ridiculous HOA rulebook. One of them, Carla, told me her backyard patio was recently torn up by soil erosion specialists hired by the board. She hadn't requested any work. Another neighbor, Tom, had his water meter replaced with a smart monitor that rerouted through a private server without ever approving the change. The most disturbing, an elderly vet named Mr. Dwyer, whose entire garden had been bulldozed last month under the claim it violated visual harmony standards. When I asked if he'd gotten a vote notice, he just laughed and said, "They don't ask anymore. They just do." The pattern was clear. Hush-hush projects, funded with community money, executed with zero transparency, and in some cases, outright trespassing. I dug deeper into the HOA board, especially the president, Mark Leland. Public records showed he'd recently transferred a large sum, 6 figures, from a private fund into a company called Deep Rock Environmental Services. I looked them up, the same name printed on the side of the contractor's toolboxes from earlier that morning. The deeper I went, the dirtier it got. Mark Leland was listed as a silent investor in Deep Rock through a third-party holding company registered in Delaware. The documents were dry and dense, but the trail was undeniable. HOA dues were being funneled into private development schemes, and they were exploiting supposed green projects as a cover for resource extraction. At this point, I knew I had enough to raise serious alarms. I started documenting everything, screenshots, interviews with neighbors, dates, timestamps, photos of the drill site. I compiled it all into a shared drive and sent a copy to my cousin who works in municipal zoning. He promised to review the legality of the HOA's overreach. Meanwhile, I tried reaching out to local law enforcement. I left voicemails with the county commissioner, emailed the planning department, and even tried the Environmental Protection Office. No response. Not a single one. 3 days passed, then 5, then a week. Every door I knocked on got mysteriously closed in my face. Carla said she'd seen a board member speaking with a city official at the golf course, just days after I submitted my complaint. Something didn't add up. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about my land anymore. It wasn't about a rig or stolen oil or HOA overreach. This was a coordinated operation, the kind that hides behind legal jargon, paperwork manipulation, and old connections. A community was being plundered from the inside, and the very people who should have protected us were either complicit or looking the other way. I realized I couldn't rely on the usual channels. If I wanted justice, I'd have to go public, loudly, aggressively, with evidence no one could ignore. The board thought they were clever, masking greed as development. But they underestimated me, and they had no idea what I had planned next. By the end of the second week, things took a dark turn. At first, it was subtle. A warning letter on my door from the HOA stating I was in violation of environmental upkeep standards due to soil displacement on my southern lot, ironically the exact area where they had drilled. A fine followed, then another. Within days, I'd supposedly broken 3 separate HOA regulations, all of which I'd never heard of before. Unauthorized landscaping changes, tampering with community infrastructure, and my favorite, unauthorized aerial surveillance. They were clearly spooked and retaliating. The very board that trespassed onto my land and illegally extracted natural resources was now accusing me of misconduct. It was laughable until I realized just how coordinated this smear campaign really was. I received an official-looking letter from the city's environmental office. According to the letter, a neighbor report claimed I'd been illegally dumping industrial runoff near a protected aquifer. The irony was nauseating. I hadn't dumped anything, but I knew who had. Things escalated quickly. One morning, I walked out to my barn and noticed muddy boot prints leading to the wellhead near my horse corral. The gate lock had been cut, clean, and sharp. My stomach dropped. Someone had tried to get to my water supply. I collected samples that afternoon and sent them to a lab out of town for analysis. If they were bold enough to drill without permission, what else were they willing to do? Later that evening, my phone buzzed with a message from an old friend, Carlos, who happened to work in the clerk's office downtown. He wasn't supposed to share anything, but he warned me anyway. You didn't hear it from me, but the HOA board's trying to file a civil suit. Something about you interfering with approved community development. It's a sealed draft right now, but you might want to lawyer up. Interfering with community development? That was their cover? They'd exploited a fabricated clause, drilled on land they didn't own, and now they were flipping the narrative to make me look like the criminal. That's when I knew. If I didn't get ahead of this, they'd bury me in red tape and legalese until I either backed off or went broke. And I wasn't going to let that happen. The next day, I took every precaution. I installed hidden motion-activated cameras around the property, some visible, most not. Trail cams in trees, infrared under the eaves, and even a drone programmed to patrol my perimeter twice a night. I wanted faces. I wanted license plates. If they stepped foot on my ranch again, I'd have them on record. And it worked. Within days, I had footage of a white pickup truck with no plates driving slowly along the eastern fence line at 2 a.m. The same truck returned the following night, parking near the equipment shed before taking off when the drone spotlight kicked on. 2 nights later, I caught someone with bolt cutters trying to access the fenced area behind my tool trailer. They left in a hurry, but not before the camera got a clear shot of their face and the HOA board member name badge clipped to their collar. I uploaded everything to an encrypted drive and shared it with my cousin, the same one who had been digging into the zoning violations. He was stunned. "They're not just violating civil codes," he said. This is criminal trespass, possibly even environmental fraud if that drilling wasn't reported correctly. I'm forwarding this to someone who can help. But I wasn't. Done. I realized the only way to stop the drilling for good was to take physical action. I couldn't trust the city. I couldn't trust the HOA. And legal battles would take months, if not years, while they kept extracting and profiting from my land. So I did the only thing I could. I shut them down. Literally. One afternoon, while the board was hosting a community beautification seminar down at the clubhouse, I loaded up my flatbed with 50 bags of high-strength construction cement. I drove out to every hole I'd mapped with the drone, every drill site they'd punctured in the soil, and every covert valve they thought I hadn't noticed. I filled each one to the brim, sealed it tight, cemented it shut like a tomb. I poured until the barrels ran dry and the sun dipped below the hills. No more flow, no more theft, no more bleeding my land for their private gains. They thought they could bully me into silence. Instead, I blocked every illegal oil channel they had. When the trucks came back days later to check their pressure valves, they found nothing but stone, and the look on Karen's face when she realized they were cut off, worth every pound of cement. The next phase of this war wasn't going to be fought with angry letters or phone calls. It was time for action, and this time I wasn't reacting. I was strategizing. I had one goal: shut down every illegal oil access point they'd drilled on my land, permanently. I rented industrial-grade concrete mixers and secured a bulk supply of quick-drying cement. I told the local supplier it was for a foundation repair project. He didn't ask questions, probably helped by the fact that I paid in cash and told him I didn't want a receipt. I needed zero paper trail until I was ready to go public. Over the next few nights, I worked like a ghost. Using coordinates I'd mapped from drone footage, I visited each site under cover of darkness. No headlights, just infrared goggles and flood lamps with red lenses so I wouldn't alert anyone from a distance. Each hole they'd drilled, some shallow, others disturbingly deep, got the same treatment. Reinforced rebar cages packed with crushed gravel, then poured solid with high-strength concrete. Every hole was now dead, but I knew them by now. This board wasn't going to quit. They'd drilled illegally on private land, lied about it, tried to frame me. These weren't just HOA busybodies. They were predators with a scheme, and now I was cutting off their money supply. I knew they'd come back. So I upgraded my surveillance system. I added seismic sensors buried at random spots near the southern fields, their favorite location to sneak in. I also installed RFID motion tags that pinged my phone if any metallic object larger. Then a wrench moved through a mapped zone. That included drills, diggers, tow hitches, you name it. The system paid off faster than I expected. 3 nights later, around 3:17 a.m., I got a silent ping. Vibration detected, Zone 6. Then another, metal object detected, Zone 5. I threw on HOA, my boots, and watched from a vantage point overlooking the area. Sure enough, headlamps, 2 men in reflective vests, 1 portable drill rig humming quietly, and a red Ford utility truck idling nearby. It was happening again. They were starting another hole. But this time I didn't just watch, I acted. I waited exactly 4 minutes, long enough for them to lower the core drill, for the bit to start carving into my soil. Then I kicked on my drone spotlight and launched the security siren. The rig operator panicked and tripped over the drill line. His partner bolted toward the truck. I came around from the tree line with 2 cameras rolling, one on my chest, one on a helmet rig, and shouted just loud enough to be caught on video. "This is private property. You are trespassing. Cease operations now." They didn't even look back. Just sped off, leaving the drill bit jammed into the ground. I walked up, pulled the control module off the rig, and pointed my flashlight at the hole. It wasn't even 3 feet deep yet. Perfect. I dumped in 4 bags of quick dry, stirred, it with a steel rod and sealed it right there on camera. That was the moment I knew I had them. The next morning, I hand-delivered a folder to the county courthouse. Inside, photos of the trespassers, time-stamped footage of the illegal drill operation, environmental sample reports from contaminated groundwater, and a notarized complaint filed against the HOA board for trespassing, illegal resource extraction, and environmental tampering. I even included lab reports showing chemical traces near the wellhead, evidence that could indicate illegal dumping or runoff from unlicensed drilling. That same afternoon, as if on cue, 3 board members showed up at my front gate. They weren't smiling. Karen was leading them. Her hair was pulled back so tight I thought she might crack under pressure. Behind her stood Bill, the treasurer, and Dwayne, the so-called community safety liaison, still wearing his ridiculous utility belt like he was part of some HOA. "SWAT team, we need to talk," Karen barked. I didn't move. "About what? Your illegal operations? Or the fact that you fled a crime scene last night?" Bill stepped forward, face red. "You can't just start blocking community projects. That's an act of sabotage." I laughed. "You mean cementing over my own property to stop theft and contamination?" Karen sneered. "This is far from over." I smiled and pulled a folded paper from my back pocket. "This is a court-stamped copy of the environmental damage investigation I filed this morning. You'll be hearing from the county. And if there's even one more boot print on my land, I'll push for criminal charges." They froze. I could see it in their eyes. Panic. Not just because of the cement or the footage, but because the investigation meant they couldn't hide this anymore. They were exposed, and the best part? I wasn't done yet. By the time the Department of Environmental Protection showed up at the ranch gate with 2 trucks, clipboards in hand, and a soil sampling team, I already had the coffee on. I'd been expecting this moment, preparing for it. But the HOA board? Not so much. The agents didn't waste time. They had received not only my formal complaint, but several anonymous tips from within the neighborhood. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who had caught wind of something shady happening behind those closed HOA meetings. Turns out when people smell oil, and especially money, they get curious. And when they feel used, they get angry. The DEP team scanned the sealed cement patches I had documented and pointed out others I hadn't even noticed. In total, 12 illegal drill sites were discovered. That number alone would have triggered a review. But then they started sampling the surrounding soil and water, and the real damage began to show. Within 48 hours, I got a call from the lead environmental officer. He didn't even try to hide how serious it was. Their preliminary tests had found traces of benzene, toluene, and hydrocarbon compounds leaching into nearby soil beds. One of the samples showed runoff had already begun creeping toward a natural spring that supplied water to 3 other properties, including a small family farm with livestock. This wasn't just trespassing or rogue drilling. This was environmental endangerment. By the end of the week, a regional affiliate of a major news network had picked up the story. The headline on the evening broadcast read, "Local HOA accused of running unauthorized oil operations on private ranch. Environmental hazards discovered." The image they showed was a drone shot I had anonymously submitted. Cracked portable drilling rigs, abandoned barrels, and large cemented patches all over my land. The visuals were damning. The internet did what it does best. It lit up. Within hours, the HOA board was in damage control mode. First, they called a closed-door emergency meeting, but that didn't stay closed for long. A disgruntled HOA secretary leaked a portion of the internal notes, revealing that the board had invested dues money into an undisclosed exploratory operations fund, one with no paper trail, no vote, and no disclosure to members. Residents were furious. One by one, neighbors started showing up at my gate asking what I knew, what I'd seen. Some were visibly shaken, especially when I showed them the footage of the men trespassing and drilling, the fluid containers left behind, the traces of oil in the soil. Then came the offer. a legal rep for the HOA, a stone-faced man in a cheap suit and a smoother voice, called to open a dialogue for resolution. They wanted to avoid escalation, of course. He offered a 5-figure payout and asked me to sign a non-disclosure agreement in return for dropping the environmental complaint and removing my drone footage from circulation. I didn't even let him finish. I told him plainly, "This isn't about money, it's about accountability, and no one's getting away with this." I doubled down, made another public statement, and delivered a second round of documentation, this time directly to the county's environmental prosecutor. The momentum was shifting, and the HOA knew it. You could see it in the way their social media pages went silent, the way their monthly newsletters stopped arriving, and especially in how board members began quietly disappearing from the neighborhood. And something incredible started happening. For the first time since moving in, I saw the community unite, not under the HOA, but around the idea of justice. People started organizing meetings, real ones, open and transparent. The neighborhood vet volunteered to test nearby pets and livestock. For contamination, the local mechanic offered help inspecting vehicles that may have passed through tainted zones. A retired environmental attorney who lived down the road offered to help file a class action lawsuit if it came to that. What began as a personal violation turned into a community movement. The board had underestimated me, but more importantly, they had underestimated everyone. They thought they could dig, drill, exploit, and vanish before anyone noticed. What they didn't expect was for a rancher with cameras, concrete, and a relentless drive for justice to stop them cold, and then light the match that would ignite an investigation none of them could dodge. The storm that followed made everything, up to that point, feel like the calm. When the State Attorney General's office officially opened a criminal investigation into the HOA board, the announcement was broadcast like wildfire. I watched the press conference from the living room, boots still muddy from the field. The lead investigator didn't mince words. This was a case of corporate collusion, illegal resource extraction, and environmental endangerment. 3 board members were subpoenaed within the first week. 2 more resigned and attempted to relocate out of state, but were promptly intercepted after their names were flagged in sealed documents handed over by a whistleblower. I later learned that person was the same HOA treasurer who had approached me quietly weeks prior, suspicious but too afraid to act alone. My instincts had been right. The HOA itself froze, literally. A judge ordered their bank accounts and all. Administrative functions suspended pending investigation. No dues could be collected, no fines issued, and no enforcement letters sent. It was like watching a once tyrannical regime collapse under its own weight. Mailboxes stayed empty for once, and the silence was oddly satisfying. Meanwhile, the oil company that had partnered illegally with the HOA board found itself under heavy fire. Not only had they bypassed necessary permits and environmental assessments, but the subcontractors they used weren't even licensed for extraction. That little detail cost them dearly. The county pulled their business license, and they were blacklisted from operating in 3 surrounding counties. It was like watching a tree fall in slow motion, loud, messy, and completely deserved. As for my land, that was the part I cared about most. With help from the environmental attorneys and support from local residents, I was able to file a special land claim with the county registrar, one that invoked a protective stewardship deed, effectively banning all future attempts at mineral extraction, drilling, or commercial development without my express consent and a full community vote. In short, no one would ever dig a hole on my ranch again without going through me first. But it didn't stop there. Word of what happened spread beyond our quiet area. Other neighborhoods, other HOAs, started asking questions. A few small communities reached out to me directly, asking how they could conduct independent audits of their own boards. I even spoke at a town hall 2 counties over, sharing what I'd learned, encouraging others not to stay silent when something didn't feel right. I never intended to start a movement. I just wanted my land back. But what began as a personal battle for respect and sovereignty turned into a catalyst for reform, and in the midst of it all, something unexpected grew stronger. Our community. People who once kept to themselves now shared tools, worked together, and looked out for one another. The family with the small spring nearby, their water tested clean again after remediation efforts. The local school invited environmental experts to speak to students about land rights and conservation. We weren't just recovering, we were evolving. There was no grand ceremony, no newspaper front page declaring victory. But one evening, weeks after the final ruling came in, I stood by the fence at the highest ridge on my ranch. The holes were sealed, the wind was clean, my boots were on my dirt. No noise, no lies, just peace. The sun dipped below the edge of the hills, throwing gold across the sealed patches like a final seal of justice. No more silence, no more trespassers, no more pretending that power was above accountability. Just me, my land, and the truth that brought it all down. If this story fired you up even half as much as it did me, do one thing. Hit that like button to show that no one should get away with abusing their power. Subscribe for more real stories of people standing up to HOAs, greedy boards, and those who think they're above the law. And drop a comment below. Have you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare like this? Let's make noise, because silence is how they win.